चलो जूम में मूव हो जाओ। मैंने ले लिया स्क्रीनशॉट। हाँ हो गया हो गया। हाँ तेरा स्क्रीनशॉट में आ गया है बेटा। हाँ
तो थोड़ा कुछ नाम सोचो, डिस्कस करो अपने अपने पर्सनल ग्रुप में, ऐसा नाम होगा ऐसा नाम होगा, इसमें 365 डेज भी इंक्लूड हो जाए, जिसमें मैं भी इंक्लूड हो जाऊँ, जिसमें आप लोग भी इंक्लूड हो जाओ, ऐसा कोई नाम BAYAM, वयम। वयम एक संस्कृत वर्ड है और उसका मतलब है कि हम सब साथ में। तो ऐसे कुछ जैसे वो इंट्रोवर्ट है ना, इंट्रोवर्ट जैसे थोड़ा फेमस हो गया, नाम ही थोड़ा ऐसा थोड़ा हाँ, तो वैसे कुछ नाम अगर आप बना सको तो उसके ऑथर भी हम सभी रहेंगे, क्योंकि हम सबका आइडिया था, हम सभी रहेंगे। और इंस्टाग्राम पे लगाओ मुझे।
Okay guys, it's 9:20 and you can join Zoom meeting in 5 minutes. Okay.
આ નવું છે અમારા કોલેજમાં કે ગૂગલ મીટ પર અટેન્ડન્સ આપીને ઝૂમ પર જવાનું તમારી અટેન્ડન્સ થઈ ગઈ હવે ઝૂમ પર શું ટાઈમ પાસ માસ્ટર ક્લાસ જેમાં આખો દુનિયા આવે
Good morning, Lolita ma'am.
Morning. Who's that, Manish? Is that you?
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah. Has Vasudha joined us? Yeah, she has.
Yes,
yeah.
yes,
Okay.
yes.
Is Vivek there?
No, ma'am.
Okay. So then I will introduce her.
Okay, fine.
Hello, Vasudha. How are you?
I'm doing well. How are you?
I'm good. I'm good. Manish, are we waiting or should we start? Tell me.
5 minutes, ma'am.
Manish,
Yes, ma'am.
5 minutes.
5 minutes, yes.
Kiran there? Who's there from Foundation?
Sorry, ma'am.
Good morning, ma'am. Mukesh is there.
Yes, Mukesh sir, Ravi sir.
Yeah, Mukesh, I'm going to introduce Vasudha and yeah, hi Vipul. And I'm going to leave because I have another class which I've neglected for the past 2
Sure, ma'am.
days.
Sure, ma'am. Yeah.
And I also have a meeting with Obrojit. So,
Okay.
yeah. So this is Vasudha's first lecture, and then let's hope and see we can get her to do some more stuff starting next semester, maybe. Yeah,
Okay.
Vasudha?
Yeah, I'm super excited and on board.
Yes, do not feel nervous.
Oh, yeah. Thanks.
I know it's very easy for me to say because I'm doing this like on a minute-to-minute basis, but I know how it is.
Yeah,
Sometimes
this is also
you
like
get
the first time I'm doing a Zoom class, so it's quite an interesting experience. to navigate.
platform. Yeah, okay. So do you know how you can ask any of these people to help you screen share and all if you want to, or if you figured it out, it's okay.
Yeah, I figured it out yesterday, so I think.
Okay. Otherwise, you can ask Manish or Mukesh, whoever is there. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, guys, I think I'll just introduce. Should we still wait, Mukesh? 2-3 minutes? Kya kare?
Start. Already we have reached 20.
Yes, ma'am.
We can start.
We can start now.
9:32.
Yes.
Yeah. So I'm just going to make this like into a 3-sentence thing. So good morning, everybody. I don't think I know really anybody in this class because I don't teach them. And they would have interacted with me at some point for something, I presume, the induction or so they know who I am. Guys, do you know who I am? Somebody can
Yes,
answer.
ma'am.
Are they all muted?
Yes,
Yes, ma'am. Okay, fine. Okay.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, good morning
Hello,
to
ma'am.
all.
morning.
And well, it's a hot and humid day. Really, I don't know what it's like and where all of you are, I suppose, in different parts of the country. Vasudha, I'm told, is in Bangalore, right, Vasudha?
That's right. Yeah.
Okay, so Vasudha is, she's had some very interesting experience. She's studied in the United States, in San Francisco, and she says that she's an artist and she's a curator of work, and she's also now wanting to become an educator, which is very, very nice because not very many people really want to do that. So it's also about knowledge sharing and, you know, seeing what you can do with youngsters. So it's so welcome to that. And I hope you continue with your practice. And I'm sure I'm told you've got working on some residency, which you're looking at, which should be very interesting. And yes, so visual narratives is what Vasudha is going to talk about. I might tell you all that in today's context of design, storytelling is really an art. Storytelling is very, very, very important, you know. And the reason I talk in some places is because I think I know how to tell a story. I mean, I could still maybe better it. But the fact that you can narrate and tell a story and create an imagery or create an experience around that, I would say, is very important for all of you who are starting out in your foundation today. And I'm going to be here for the first 5-7 minutes and a little later maybe. And then I'm going to leave it to Vasudha and Mukesh. Can I please ask you to just do a vote of thanks for Vasudha before she leaves? Yeah?
Sure, ma'am. Sure.
Yeah, because I will have to run off to several things that are happening today. Okay,
Yeah.
so all the best, and guys, I hope you do enjoy this. It's important for you all.
Yeah.
So welcome, Vasudha, and please go ahead.
Thank you so much for the introduction. I'm really honored to be here and to talk to all of you. My name is Vasudhaa Narayanan, and I'm an artist and a curator, and I've been working in this field for about 6 to 8 years. So my background is that I grew up in Bangalore and Singapore and Nigeria, and all of these experiences have informed who I am as a person today. And as a visual artist, my work sort of addresses identity, domesticity, and gender through visual mediums like photography, sculpture, performance art, and all of these things really lend itself well to visual narrative and storytelling. So I'm going to screen share and start my presentation. Let's see. Okay. Interesting. I'm not able to, are you able to see this?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah,
There's
it's fine, Vasudha.
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah, we are able to see it.
Okay. There's a way for me to just share a portion of the presentation, which I want to do. Is there a way for me to do that?
Achha, you want the speaker view? Manish, can you do the speaker view? Manish, speaker view में कर सकते हैं क्या इसको?
पर वो सर उनके वहां से ही होगा.
वहां से ही होगा?
हाँ, क्योंकि मैंने उनको पोस्ट बना दिया, वही कर पाएंगे.
Okay, so that will be a bit tricky because the presentation is with you, it's not with them. So we'll have to just go along. Doesn't matter, you just go slide by slide, doesn't matter.
Okay.
You can always talk and, whatever.
Sure.
Vasudha, you can just click on the zoom button, which is on the left-hand side corner, and you can focus on one particular area. Or you can just change the view icon
Yes,
according to your needs.
Okay.
If you want to focus on one particular area, which is like the photograph, then just go to the zoom button and increase the percentile over there. Keep it 125 or something. It will zoom into that particular area, and then you can rearrange it in the screen as well.
Okay. Can you see that?
Yeah.
Okay, I'll just sort of start playing the slideshow.
Yeah, that's fine. That's perfect.
Yeah. So visual narrative through storytelling of images is a really interesting way for us to understand the world that we live in and how we sort of exist within this framework, right? Each of these images are telling a story. Some of them are factual, some of them are constructed. Some of these images transport us within a specific landscape. I don't know why it keeps getting stuck. I'm not able to toggle the images. Sorry. Is there a way for me to sort of control?
Well, there are quite a few images here.
Okay. Yeah. So each of these images help tell a story or a narrative and provide us context into which this sort of world is situated in, right? We enter these images in very different ways. And that is something that we'll explore through this presentation. So in section 1, we will look at what is visual, what is narrative, when combined, what is visual narrative, and the different mediums through which we can explore visual narrative. So what is visual? It is something that can be seen with the human eye. It is a way for us to process information, a way for us to situate ourselves in relation to the world, and a way for us to experience things like objects, food, travel, concerts, your phone, movies, the news, and all of this informs our worldview and how we sort of understand the world that we exist in. I'll let you read this on your own. So this is what a narrative is, right? It's a story that is told from a specific perspective. And that is how we look at sort of the subjectivity and objectivity of image making and photography. So visual narrative is essentially an image or a series of images that help build a story. So what are some of the visual narrative mediums, right? This is a sort of preliminary understanding of visual narrative. They exist in multi-form, right? There's photography, there's video, and in video in today's generation, we have TikTok, we have films, cinema, graphic novels, literary novels, fiction novels. But today, we will just focus on photography and my sort of understanding and experience of it and how it can help us build sequences and, as a consequence, visual narrative. So we will look at analog images, we will look at photojournalism and the single image, and we will look at conceptual images made by photographers like Dayanita Singh and Dwayne Michaels, and how they use text and sequencing to sort of build a narrative. Right? And all of this will be situated within a fact versus fiction framework. So a book that really helped me sort of understand my own initial understanding of the world and visual narrative is John Berger's Ways of Seeing. I have provided a sort of text of all of these references that I've used in this presentation at the end. So I can leave that later for you to see. But so he quotes in this book, perspective makes the eye the center of the visual world. And so what does that really mean, right? What does it mean to have perspective? When we look at an image, what does it make us feel? What are the qualities of the image? And the most important thing is, what does it mean to be a looker? And what does it mean to be looked at? And how does these two sort of relationships help us build perspective of the visual world? And that is a very important sort of understanding of this subject matter, the looking and the looked at. So that is where we introduce subjectivity and objectivity in image making, right? And I'm going to talk about an analog reference to early image making and how that helped us sort of verify fact and fiction through subjectivity and objectivity. So this is an early painting of a horse by George Stubbs in the early 18th century, in the late 18th century. And he was a painter who was interested in painting horses. So in the beginning of the 19th century, a lot of artists were interested in painting horses because of the increase in like race horsing, you know. People always wanted to paint things that they saw and that were a reflection of the society that they existed in. And he really helped pioneer painting horses because he studied the carcasses of a horse and helped sort of understand the anatomy of it for future artists later. So it's important to look at references of previous works as we understand our worldview, right? And early images of early drawings and paintings of horses always depicted the horse where the front legs were in the front and the back legs were in the back when they were suspended in the air. And this was called the flying gallop. But the problem was there was no sort of visual, sort of factual way to verify if this was true. Because when horses are running, they run so fast that such micro movements are invisible to the human eye. And that became a very interesting sort of aspect of understanding the movement of animals and sort of verifying the factualness of how they sort of move in a space, right? So again, the flying gallop is when the front, the way they depicted it, where the front legs were in the front and the back legs were in the back. So sort of away from each other in a flying gallop, right? And here is Edward Muybridge. He was a 19th century photographer who introduced this device called the zoopraxiscope. He invented it. And essentially the zoopraxiscope was the predecessor to the film projector. And through the study of multiple single images, he started to sort of analyze the movement of horses and to sort of verify if the representation of horses and their flying gallop was in fact accurate. So when we look at this like film strip, we realize that in frame number 3, the way the horses are suspended in the air, both the legs are actually under the body and not away from each other. And that was an important factual verification that helped us understand the movement of animals. And he studied not just horses, but camels, pigs, elks, birds, even pigeons, dogs, and also the movement of humans. So fractional movement of like sports people and how the movement of the human body could be documented. So all of these things were an important, predecessor to the movies. And this actually is the first ever movie. It is a stitching of all of these single images to form a motion picture. And here we see in this specific frame that the horse's legs are under the body, and that helped us verify, the early sort of representations of horses in paintings, and disputed it by verifying it through photography. So what is a fact, right? It is something that we know to be true because it is proven by calculation and it cannot be challenged. And photojournalism as a medium is a really good way to sort of look at subjectivity and objectivity in fact and fiction, and the power of the singular image in telling a story. And this is a photograph by Henri Cartier-Bresson, which he photographed during the partition. And it's a very dramatic image. There's a lot of movement and motion, and it's a confusing photo. We don't know what exactly is happening, but the caption lends itself really well to the image. So in this, so we look at this photograph. We look at a series of still images. So what are some of the factual things we see in this image? That we see a man sitting on the floor with a placard on his hand. The floor looks like a public space, so it's a road. He is sitting down in front of a series of standing police officers. Their outfit sort of allude to the fact that they are police officers, right? And we don't really know what is written on the placard. We're not able to see that. So what can we tell about this image so far, right? These are some of the factual things we know. And an important thing to sort of question is you as a viewer, where are you situated in this image? Are you in between the man sitting on the floor and the cops, or are you behind the cops, or are you behind the man? And how does that help you sort of understand this photo, right? If you were behind the cops, would you even see this man sitting on the floor? And would it have that same impact? So these are things to question, the gaze of the viewer in the photograph. So when we look at, this is a photograph by Don McCullin, who was a very famous war photographer. And the title of this image is Protester, Cuban Missile Crisis in London, 1962. So we know now more about the image. We know that he's a protester and he's protesting against the Cuban Missile Crisis. And that is an important aspect of using text in relation to images to build a visual narrative. And this photograph is an iconic image of the tank man, where in 1989, pro-democracy protesters were protesting against the government. And what we see here is an image of a man standing in front of multiple tanks, these large sort of institutions of power. They're tools of oppression, right? They're tools of control within a society. So what does it mean for this man to stand in front of these tanks? How does it make us feel? And how can we relate it to our own personal experiences? So have we ever been in a situation where we have stood up to somebody in authority? You know, was it our teachers, a bully, our parents? You know, how can we sort of relate to these images with our own experiences? And that is a very important part of telling a story, like how it feels here and here. So this photograph, the framing of the image, the fact that the man is in it, and what is included and excluded all builds context into photography, right? We have more context of where this image is taken along with the caption. And these photographs help sort of memorialize a single act of resistance. This photograph was taken by Lana Haroon in April 2019 when protesters gathered in Khartoum, Sudan, protesting the dictatorship by the president, Omar al-Bashir, right? So what are, again, the factual representations of this image? We see a lady standing on top of a car, on the roof of a car, pointing her finger to the sky. Her attire is alluding to a certain cultural reference, and the earring is really loud and shiny in spite of all the bright lights on the, you know, in the horizon. We see a sea of people, and all of them, most of them are women, and all of them are recording her with their phones, right? So what does that mean to sort of look at something through a mediated lens, where we see so many screens before we see the image? And how does the framing of this image help build context, right? So in an interview that I read about this photograph, where they interviewed this woman, her name is Allah Salah, and she is a 22-year-old woman, and the outfit she's wearing is a sort of callback to earlier Sudanese women in previous generations who also fought against dictatorship. So there is a legacy that is present in these images, and how they sort of build and help us understand dignity and patience, and help give us courage in how we navigate this world. And this photograph is by Jonathan Franklin, taken in the Black Lives Matter movement. And these cops, they look like stormtroopers with heavy duty artillery, whereas this girl is wearing a flowing dress. And she looks so calm and stoic and composed. And this sort of relationship helps give us perspective about power dynamics through image making, right? We understand, we get a sense of like understanding of, you know, stoicism, of dignity, of gratitude and patience, and the ability to fight for something that is bigger than us. And all of these images help build global solidarity. When we see all of them together, we see the relationship between these images, right? And this aspect of relational images is a very important part of curation. So as a curator, when I look at these photographs, I look at what are all the similarities. There's power, there's a power struggle, there is, you know, cops in these images, there is a single protester in many ways. And how does that build a sort of collective narrative in how we look at the world? And that is how we will go into curation, sequencing, and juxtaposition. And Dayanita Singh's work is, you know, her work is so beautiful. It's very poetic. It makes you think, it pauses, and her work sort of helps us understand sequencing and the juxtaposition of images and how they sort of relate to each other, right? And how we can understand context through her work. So Museum Bhavan is this little book. It's a box of 10 books. And each of these books are a different story. So there's museums of vitrines, of furniture, of photography, Machines, Museum of Men, and all of these books can be experienced individually. We look at each book on our own, and the beauty of this book is it's a portable museum. So if we buy this box and we open it up, we can build a museum in our own space of this work, you know? And that is an interesting thing to think about when we look at installation of images and how a sequence in a specific space can help give us context and understand the nature of the work, right? So I'm going to quickly get into two specific books, very brief images. This is Museum of Machines. And in this photograph, we see that there is something in the foreground and something in the background, right? In the foreground, we see lines, and these are interesting ways to sort of build a narrative by shape, by form, by content, context, color. All of these things lend itself really well to visual narrative. So in this photograph, we see a repetition. We see multiple keys that are hanging on this sort of lever. And then that repetition continues into this image. Like we see the repetition of the pipes, the lines, and let's start thinking about what is light and visible and what is slightly more dark and invisible. How do we place ourselves in relation to this image, right? Over here, when we're looking at it, we're a little higher up, whereas in this image, we are like in the same vantage point. And how does that help build a story, right? This photograph, again, there are some objects on the left, machinery on the left, machinery on the right, and a huge, large object in front of us. So when we're looking at this image, where are we in this photograph? We're in between these two things and in front of this. So does this make us feel sort of closed in and claustrophobic? Do we feel open? Do we feel like we have space to move? And how does that help build the story of where this machine is situated? Again, over here, this machine has a little bit of room, right? But it's so large, it's almost like a robot, and we can't understand it. So the quality of images, it's very important to ask yourself how it makes us feel. Do we have to like practically think about it and break it down in our heads? Or do we feel it in our chest? Do we feel lonely? Do we feel closed? Do we feel open? Do we feel like a variety of emotions or sometimes it can be both, sometimes we have to use our brain to understand what the photo is trying to make us feel. And that is where, there's an interesting sort of relationship between fact and fiction. So now we go into the Museum of Men, right? What happens when a man is introduced into this layer? We understand that he is wearing a factory hat and he's standing on a machine in a factory, in sort of a warehouse. So all of this builds context. Again, here we are going into someone else's private space, right? This looks like a photography lab. We see an enlarger on the left, we see a large format box on the right, and we understand that this person is working in this lab. What do his clothes tell us about who he is? Is he a worker? Is he the manager? Is he the boss? These are all interesting sort of ways to understand a photograph. In this image, we see that the vantage point is exactly eye to eye, right? So what does it mean? How do you feel when a photograph is looking at you? Like, look at this image and ask yourself what you feel. Do you feel like the person's gaze is going into you and you feel conscious? Do you feel comfortable? These are all important questions to ask. And again, we see that there's a rolling pin and there's flour. So it gives us context about where this is taken. It tells us that he's probably a baker or works at a bakery. And all of this helps build narrative. Same with this, right? He's in a factory, looks like a bureaucratic space, probably a government office. You can see the filing cabinet with multiple books in the back. So all of this sort of helps build narrative. And what happens when all of these photographs sort of exist together in an installation, right? they all are speaking to each other. We see images of people on the right, we see boxes on the left. And when we navigate this world in a very physical way, we ourselves are experiencing that perspective and exchange. So we are doing the looking and these photographs are being looked at. And that relationship builds perspective. And this work is also exhibited in an accordion fold. And an accordion fold is a very interesting way to explore sequencing of images. So I'm just going to show you an example. If you take a piece of paper like this and fold it alternatively, and if this was a photo, we see that this is a single image. But what happens when there's an image here, an image here, and another image here? They all are building a narrative. They're all speaking to each other to tell us a story. So a very interesting way to build story is through the accordion fold. And it's simple. You can just print out photos and stick it on paper and fold it up. And that is a very legitimate form of bookmaking. So what have I learned, right, as an artist myself, when I look at these sequences? So this is a photograph I took in 2016. Notice how the lines of the image is moving away from each other. So our focus is driven to the couple in the center, right? We see that they're holding each other in embrace. And the quality of the image is that of love. You feel like you're infringing upon a very private moment, right, as the viewer. And what happens here? You know, what does distance and proximity lend itself in both these images? Over here, we don't see the faces of the couple, right? We only see their hands. They're just holding each other. So I have built narrative by looking at hands, by looking at black and white as a medium, and by looking at the way the eye travels in a photograph. Again here, this is an exchange between my friend and I during the pandemic. And this photograph on the left is a photo of her and her daughter. And this photograph on the right is a photo of me and my mother. So I'm looking at contact, intimacy, touch, hands, and far and close as ways to build drama and narrative in the image. So what does juxtaposition do, right? Juxtaposition is essentially how one image is speaking to another image. How do they compare and contrast each other? So this book is called This Equals That by Jason Fulford and Tamara Shropson. And it's a very fun visual book that helps us build juxtaposition in narrative. And the photos in this book relate to each other through shape, form, content, color, and emotions, right? How do we feel? So over here, in a very practical sense, we see triangles, right? We see the triangle of the mast of the boat, and that is a fact. And then we see this triangle of a wooden box, sort of a wooden triangle. And how are these two images speaking together? Always remember that sequencing and image making is a really fun process. It doesn't have to be super well thought through or planned. It should just be fun. And then now what is happening here, right? This image on the left, which is the wooden block, is again connecting in shape with the triangle of this sort of shark with this girl running away from the mouth. And here there is an introduction of humor in the photo. We see a similarity in the colors of the color of her dress and the background of the wooden block and the mouth of the shark. And all of these ways help build a relationship between these two images. Again, here we look at the shape of the shark, and then we look at these like flapping pennants, right, in the air. A quality that we notice is how the sky is both blue in these images, and where the image on the left converges, the flaps begin. So there's sort of a poetic movement, and how the photographer is trying to get us to look at these photos. Again, over here, we see the same pennants and these series of blades. So of course, we now understand that color is a continuous theme in a way to build narrative. But how do we feel about the pointedness of the the blades and the pointedness of the triangles? Do we physically feel it's about isolation. Both of these are alone in a space, right? And the shape of the drooping flowers sort of allude to the mouth of the slug. And these are ways to hello?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, I think something happened and I got cut out of the call, but I'm gonna continue sharing the
There must
presentation.
be some network issue, I guess. Yeah, you can again start with the presentation.
Yeah, so we feel a kind of confusion and sadness that, you know, the photographer is trying to tell us in these images. Over here, we look at the texture. So this little toy on the left, we see, you know, it's sort of rough to touch. And then we look at the orange and its shape, we see the relationship between texture and form, right? And here we look at the shadow of a tree that sort of alludes to movement and dynamic sort of movement. And that is being related to this image of this inflatable like gorilla or ape or whatever. And it, again, there's humor, movement in these images. So this is a photograph that these are two photographs that I've taken to talk about the sequencing between images and how they relate to each other. There's sort of a sort of relational aspect where both the photographs are meeting in the same way. There's similarity in color, there's similarity in texture, where we see the lace tablecloth and the quality of her shirt, you know, her kurta. We can see the relationship between these images, and that's how you build form and content. Again, here, I'm looking at one aspect, which is the human body. What does it mean for, you know, this person to look at you in a photograph? And what is strange about it? You only see one face, but you see two bodies, right? So I'm using the body as a tool to sort of build narrative and relate between two images. There's an abstraction of the body. And color, again, is a common trope that I explore. So this is a really interesting way for us to introduce fiction into the framework. So fiction is an imaginative narration and something that is made up. It is a story that is conceptualized, created, and produced by somebody. And it is not situated in facts, but it is definitely inspired and borrowed from lived experiences. So Dwayne Michaels is this photographer who explored this fictional aspect of photography by using text on all his images and built sequences. So in this photograph, we see the title. It's called "There Are Things Here Not Seen in This Photograph." I'm not sure if you all can read it. Maybe I'll give you a couple of seconds to read the photo. And then I'll talk about a few of the things. Okay, so some of the things that we read, right? He says, "My shirt was wet with perspiration. The beer tasted good, but I was still thirsty. I watched a roach walk slowly along the edge of a bar stool. I had to go to the men's room and someone walked towards me asking me for money." And now all of these things are things that are not visible in this photograph. Yet he is making us imagine these things when we look at it. We look at the dynamic nature of this photograph, even though there is nobody in this photo. And that is a really beautiful quality of using text and images to sort of build a narrative. How do opposite things convene in the center, right? Again, this is another photo of his. They have a very Polaroid quality, if you notice, right? A letter from my father. So he says, as long as I can remember, my father always said that one day he would write me a very special letter, but he never told me what the letter might be about. I used to try to guess what intimacy in the two of us would look at and share, what mystery, what family secret would be revealed. I know what I hoped to read in the letter. I wanted him to tell me where he had hidden his affection. But then he died and the letter never did arrive. And I never found that place where he hid his love. So it is such an honest, vulnerable thing for somebody to say. And the framing of these images make us feel the authority of his father, the slouching shoulders of the photographer, and the mother who's like a silent spectator in all of this, right? In another photograph, he uses scale to play with narrative. So the beginning image and the end image is the same, if you notice, but I will give you a moment to look at the sequence and sort of understand what he's trying to say. So we see that in the first image, it's just a photo of a bathroom. And then suddenly in the next photo, there are legs that we see. So we immediately understand that it is a miniature bathroom. And then he's crouching over the toilet bowl. Then we see it in somebody's hand. So essentially this microscopic quality of image making where we get drawn away and away and away is something that he explores in his work, right? And sequencing here, again, is helping build that narrative. And this is a very sort of graphic novel quality of image making. And again, the title here that says things are queer sort of allude to how strange this image is. Again, here we look at these different portraits and sort of the uncertainty of the magic mirror, right? He talks about the possibility of being permeated by anything and everything. And when you look at yourself in the deflection, we can never be sure about who we're looking at and which personality we're looking at in ourselves. And that is an aspect that he explores through his work. So his work is not factual at all. It's entirely fiction, you know, and he helps us sort of play with ego, our identity, our sense of possibility, and explores like metaphysical realms like this, where we see this man standing and looking at the photographer in a crowded platform. And suddenly there is this orb of light over him and he sort of disappears into the cosmos. And this is a very interesting and, you know, strange way to travel through images. And that's what we can tell about the quality of image making, right? Again, here, this is called the chance meeting. We see someone who is older and someone who's younger. And just 6 frames tell us a lot about what he's trying to achieve. We see someone older looking at someone younger. So is he saying that it's the older self looking at the younger self, reflecting upon their past? Is he saying that they're 2 different people that may have met each other at some point in their life? You know, these are all things that we are left to sort of imagine. His work blurs the lines of fact and fiction by building on ambiguity as a way of storytelling. So all in all, what are our takeaways, right? We understand what a visual narrative is and how we move from subjectivity to objectivity and what the role of the photographer is in presenting that information. How sequences, juxtaposition, context, and fiction are different ways for us to tell a visual story. And who is the person who's curating it? And what makes them a curator? You know, ask yourself these questions. And how do we tell that story as a curator? And some of the questions I have for you is, how does the image make you feel when you look at it? Is this a fact, or is this a fiction, or is it both? And when it's both, how do you sort of reconcile with the idea of truth and, you know, what is not true? And how are they all speaking to each other? How are these photos, you know, building a story and a narrative? And how does sequence help achieve that? And what is the role, again, of the photographer and the viewer? And most importantly, just have fun making these images. It has to be silly, it has to be stupid, it has to be funny. Let it be as obvious. You know, take a photo of your wall at different times of the day. And what does that tell you about the quality of time? So think about all these silly, simple, fun ways in which you can build a sequence and tell a story. And again, these are some of the references that I told you I would share. So these are a list of texts that are worth looking at to understand and build a foundation of photography. This equals that, great book. It's super fun for someone who's as young as 8 and as old as 80. And I always, when I look at this book, I learn new things about the photos in this image, in this book. And Ways of Seeing that I mentioned by John Berger, fantastic book. An interesting thing is that it started out as a TV show. So the videos, there are 4 episodes that are on YouTube that you can watch, and they are so enriching and interesting. I would definitely recommend it. Susan Sontag's On Photography. This is a bit more critical and engages with socio-political contexts and the role of the individual in perpetuating a gaze. So it is a little bit more detailed and advanced, but it's worth exploring. And Camera Lucida by Roland Barthes. Fantastic book. It's like poetry. You know, you learn so much about the human condition and yourself in relation to the world that we've created. And that's a really powerful experience. And these are some contemporary photographers to look at, many of whom I have shared in the first slide with all the images. And I'm sharing them here. If you want, I can email it to one of your professors if you want later, or take a photo or a screenshot. That's up to you. And some of them are my friends as well. And I want to encourage you to look at people who are making photos now, because in a world where we are looking at images through Instagram and it's super filtered, how do they try to maintain their story, their narrative, their authenticity, and their style through image making? And that is a very important part to learn, you know. And the works referenced and produced by these artists are not a destination, but should instead be regarded as a catalyst for your own personal creative learning and expression. So think of this as, you know, if the best way to learn is to mimic somebody else's work, you can take the exact same photographs and see what is different in what you've captured. Every single individual has a different way of telling that story. So think about how you can mimic this work, and think about how you can go completely opposite. Like, what if you build a graphic novel with images instead of just photos on a wall? You know, there are so many ways that we can play with this. And yeah, thank you so much. Do you guys have any questions?
Thank you, ma'am. It was indeed a great session. Any student who is interested to ask ma'am any question can put it in the chat box. I would request you all to put only relevant questions. Chat box is open for you all.
And of course, I want to say that if you have any questions or feel like you need to reach out or, you know, anything, please let me know, and I'm happy to put my information. I love to engage with students who are still learning, because I feel like you're not influenced by a lot of critical theory, and that really is important in how we sort of engage with the world. It's pure, and yeah, so I'm really open to engaging with you all. So Ananya asks, hi. Just a second, I'm going to answer Ananya's question, right? So for storytelling, you should have black and white photographs or color photographs. Both are fantastic. That's a really fantastic question. Both mediums and, you know, tools of photography, which is black and white and colored, have very different qualities in image making. There is something in black and white that sort of abstracts all of the distractions in image making, and we're only made to feel the emotional quality of images, right? Whereas color tells us so much about maybe class, gender, race, And all of these additional layers in how we can build a relationship. And so that is a very important sort of experience. And I would encourage I would encourage all of you to and sort of engage with both and take photos of the same thing in black and white and color and see what you notice. What are things you miss in black and white that you see in color? Whether it's texture or form or content, right? What is it that you are trying to sort of tell? Yeah, Mahi, do you want to go?
Yeah, actually, ma'am, I was just gonna help us picking questions. So
Okay. Do you want to go through them and just ask me? So because
now we have a lot of them, so I could do that.
Okay.
Ma'am, for storytelling, no, because photography is very subjective. How do we develop our own narrative, keeping it in our interest?
So start with your own point of access, right? As a photographer myself, I started photographing my own surroundings, my friends, my family, my city, the place that I lived, my neighborhood, and all of these things help you understand what your narrative and perspective is. Each of you have an individual sort of experience in this world, right? We all come from very different families. We come from different backgrounds, but yet there is a common sort of trope that we've noticed in these images where like photographs have the ability to build relationship and solidarity. So use your own narrative as a way to explore conceptual photography. I think to start with yourself is often hard to do, and I know this because I photograph myself and my family a lot. And you have to negotiate, your space, your relationships, but that is where the fun lies. What are we telling about people's relationships when we photograph a mother by a daughter? These are interesting things that only you will know, that other people will not, and you can use photography as a tool to enhance that narrative.
Thank you, ma'am. So there is a next question from Priyanka. So she asks, how important is concept of writing with the photos? And there is another question from Yashi. She says, if there is some alternative to give the text, like the concept of writing.
You can do collage making, to provide text as a reference, and concept writing for photos I would encourage you to do both. What would it look like to have no conceptual background? If you just say, today I'm going to go out on my street and take photos of this one road at 3 times of the day, at morning, afternoon, and evening. What are some of the things you notice? Whereas when you build a conceptual note where you are like, okay, I'm going to sit in front of the camera in this way. I want to feel this way. I want the camera to look at me this way. And you're constructing that whole image. And all of this is concept writing, right? How you construct that image. So these are all different ways to try. And I think concept writing is important, but not as important as having fun and experimenting. You will start to understand, your own narrative when you just have fun with it. If you start to control the narrative you're trying to say, you automatically will narrow down your focus instead of opening up all possibilities. And is there an alternative of text to show something which is not actually there in the picture? I don't know. I mean, this is a very good question. A lot of photographers lately have been using text on images to talk about the images and whatever is invisible. But I mean, you could use text, you could use video form to sort of build narrative. It doesn't have to just be photo. And if you're interested in text, like maybe like graphic, design and like writing, building type can help build a story too. There is no one way to build text, and honestly, the possibilities are endless. So if the only way right now is I would encourage you to come up with a new way to do that.
So we have a question from Soumya. She says, how to develop your own photography style?
You develop your own photography style by just getting out and shooting. That's it. Take a lot of images. When I first started, I'm not even joking. I started with an analog camera, so using film rolls. And if you have the means to do that, I would encourage you to do that, because it teaches you a lot about light and contrast and aperture and all of these things about how we can make images. And I made so many bad photographs, like so many, like things that were not visible at all. I would have hoped that this was captured in my camera, but it was just too dark or too bright. And you start understanding the qualities of the camera better. So you build your own sort of style by just going out and photographing a lot. Photograph your friends, your family, your neighborhood, and see what stories you're able to collect and connect between these things, right? Just take a lot of photos. That's the only way.
Okay, thank you, ma'am. So we have next question from Rohit Roy. He says recently he has read the graphic novel called Mouse by Art Spiegelman, which is a graphic documentation of the Nazi oppression during the Second World War in a very humorous manner. Since you are entering the education field, do you think it is a viable option to teach history to students using visual narrative of this sort?
Absolutely, that is a very, very good question. I just exploring this book for the first time. I haven't finished it, but I'm halfway through it. And I think that graphic novels are a fantastic way to look at visual narrative. Because this was a 1-hour lecture and my area of interest is photography, I focused exclusively on photography, but the scope of visual narrative is endless. We can look at history through paintings, we can look at history through graphic novels and writing and design, and how all of that has lent into sort of, teaching history and how we understand the world that we are in today. And graphic novels are a fantastic way to do that. Like Palestine, beautiful, beautiful book. And I would also encourage you to look at all of these different mediums as forms of inspiration. Because I, as a person, I'm a visual person. When I dream, I dream in images. I don't dream in words. So I've always been interested in sort of capturing a moment, and that is how I see the world. But I would encourage all of you to think about how you see the world. Is it through writing? Is it through, building like a storyboard in a graphic novel? And all of these things have absolutely different qualities. And so, yeah, that is an absolutely great question, and graphic novels are a great way to teach history. Yeah.
So one more interesting question. Do you think that there is a peak that one should reach if he or she is into photography? Moments just happen at a point and not when we desire them to happen. So how do we choose what to photograph and what not to when we say today I'll go in my surrounding to go and click pictures?
Well, there is genuinely, in my opinion, there is no peak in photography. I do think that everybody goes through different moments in time where, they're able to tell different stories and they allude to who they are as a person in life at that time. Let me just read the question. Yeah, so moments do just happen. And there's this fantastic photographer that I mentioned in the previous slide, Henry Bresson, and you should absolutely look at his work because he was revolutionary in sort of creating this thing called the decisive moment in photography, where when you're taking a photograph and in the frame, all the components in that frame just make sense. And they tell a beautiful story of what is happening, whether it's a war image, whether it's just, people in a city, and he uses reflection, contrast, and, all of that as ways to sort of experiment with telling a decisive moment. And I don't think there's any one way to tell what is the right moment and what you desire to happen, right? I mean, if you look at the references that I showed, Dayanita Singh, for example, is just photographing what is right in front of her. And it's a very poetic moment through her photos. Whereas Dwayne Michaels, he he is creating these moments. So there are different ways that you can build the decisive moment for yourself. It depends on what you're interested in, and there is no right or wrong image. They're all images that exist in a spectrum. And once you start picking out, oh, I like this image more than this. If you have two images of a tree and you like one more than the other, ask yourself why. Why do I like this image more? And that's how you start to build narrative and understand like what is the decisive moment in which you clicked that photo. Yeah.
Thank you, ma'am. So we have next question from Simran. She says black and white photographs are very pretentious. How much do you agree to this statement?
I don't agree to this statement at all. I don't think they're necessarily pretentious, but I do think it is an interesting question because it depends on like who is taking the photo, what is the subject matter, and what is being communicated with the image. It may just be that you like color photographs more. As a person, you see more in color, and there is absolutely nothing wrong with that. But black and white tells us a lot about the foundations of photography, because in black and white, we are only looking at what is visible and less visible, what is there and not there. And it teaches us a lot about the quality of light. And photography is nothing but light. It is light falling on an object that we capture through a camera, right? And it is, I mean, you can not like black and white photography, but I would encourage you to engage with it nevertheless, because it is always good to do something that you don't like and then decide why you don't like it, as opposed to being, judging it from looking at just some photographs, because you should engage with it and then understand why you don't like it. And that is absolutely okay. You don't have to like it at all, but you should know why you don't like it. Yeah.
Ma'am, so I think this could be the last question. You spoke about creating a story or some message with photography. What are your views on abstract photography?
I mean, abstract photography, like abstract art, paintings, abstract visuals, they all have a similar sort of idea, right? They want us to feel something with the image. They are making us feel like heavy or light, or using contrast as a way to distinguish between the mood of the image. And I think abstract photography can be really interesting when you're building a sequence, because they tell a fantastic story when you use lines and shapes and forms to build a relationship. And I had a lot of friends when I went to my master's program who mostly just photographed abstract things, and we would sit there in class and think like, oh my god, what do I say? I don't really understand what this image is saying. But when you look at all of these images together, they have a certain tonality to it. There is a similarity in it. There is a relationship in these images, and it may not make sense at once, but before you judge the image, ask what you're learning from it. Ask what you understand. Maybe I'm just understanding shapes, and that's okay. That's probably what they want me to understand. Maybe I'm understanding contrast, and that's okay too. You don't have to do something gimmicky, just do it because you enjoy it. And that's what a lot of people do. Like, abstract is such a complex form because people are photographing something that doesn't exist in real form. We're abstracting something and confusing it so that we as viewers sit with the photograph for a bit longer and ask ourselves, like, what is this trying to tell me? And that is a really powerful thing, because if you can get someone to sit in a room and engage with your image and like question, like, what am I supposed to feel? That is also a success. So yeah, that's my thoughts on abstract photography.
That's really nice, ma'am. Due to lack of time, we'll have to end the question and answer session here. If anyone has other questions, I think they can reach out to you otherwise via mail, or could you drop in something like that?
Yeah, I can provide my email ID.
Okay. And I would hand over the mic to Mr. Mukesh Singh for the vote of thanks.
Yeah.
Hi, Vasudhaa. Good morning.
Hi, good morning.
We teach in foundation, and this is our whole lot of bunch of foundations we are having. And thank you.
I'm sorry, you're
Such a
breaking up.
yeah, come in.
Yeah, sorry, you were breaking up. I can't hear you.
Thank you for such bringing a important topic of narration. And recently, the presence of all these the students, I'm saying, and the way you connected with the color and the texture, bringing all the elements of design and art to building a story. How you are telling that black and white and help us to build a story. A texture can help us in build a story, and how that America thing happened, or due to the color thing. And how the color is most important thing in Western world right now, and even in India we face such problem. And we have such classified advertisements of marriage, or this is whitish, blackish, whitish, and all these things. So how the color is not just simply a color to attract people, but how color can be used to bar the people for coming in one segment and making them only segmented. And in a time like this, where we are more concerned with the like and dislike on the images, you are telling us and them to build a story on image. We are more concerned on the like and dislikes on the images, and seeing of images, taking out time to see an image is very important thing they should learn. How to see an image and how to build a story out of it. It is not the image left and right or up or down on your screen, because they are in a time where they are bombarded with images. There's not their fault. In our time, it was like one image in a magazine and it was all. But now they are bombarded with the image. That's not their problem, but they have to deal with it. And it's very important to bringing that images of Tiananmen Square. I hoped some images from India would have also helped it, but you brought in Henry Carter Besson. He's a very important photographer to look into, and some female photographers who have helped in this. And that's what I want to say, your understanding and the weaving of image and the art of looking of an image, looking at the image, and the book of John Berger, The Ways of Seeing. People, you should go through it the way she has mentioned that book. You all should go through it. Thank you for your wonderful and beautiful presentation. Thank you. Looking forward for your more collaboration and working with you. Thank you, Vasudhaa.
Thank you so much. It was an honor, and I'm glad. I hope that they have a takeaway. And yeah, I'm looking forward to connecting with all of you. If you ever feel if you need anything, please reach out via email. I've shared it on the chat.
Sure.
And yeah, thank you so much for the opportunity.
Thank you. Thank you, Manish.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, ma'am.